war was launched on the 20th.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. New week, new headlines. Biden landed in Ukraine and hogged all of them. But why did he go? And what did he do there? We'll tell you all about it. Also, all the court drama in Pakistan involving Imran Khan. Meanwhile, the Taliban want to convert military bases into special economic zones. America is dealing with a multi-trillion-dollar debt problem. Credit card bills are at a record high. Social media giants want you to cough up money. And why do people touch and sometimes break artworks? A $42,000 balloon dog was shattered and it has triggered a very interesting discussion. All of this and more is coming up. The headlines first. Is Iran close to making an atom bomb? Tehran denies reports that it has enriched uranium to 84%. You need 90% to make a bomb. The International Atomic Energy Agency has sought an explanation from Iran. Tensions spiral between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Gunfight erupts between their border forces after the Taliban shut the busiest Pak-Afghan border crossing at Torkham. The only newspaper of Bangladesh's main opposition party halts printing. The government suspended it, the court upheld the order. The Dainik Dinkal has been the voice of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party for over 3 decades. In Brazil, tragedy hits the carnival weekend. More than 35 people dead as torrential rains trigger floods and landslides in the southeastern state of Sao Paulo. And France says India, the US and Saudi Arabia blocked the move to tax tech giant. Global talks focused on whether multinationals should declare their profits in every country where they operate and avoid paying taxes. Joe Biden went to Kiev. A daring move, we have to say. Kiev has been under attack. Just last week, Russia targeted the city with missiles. But US President Joe Biden, who has one of the world's most elaborate security arrangements, decided to go anyway. His team kept the visit a secret till the very last minute. No Air Force One. The US President took a train from Poland. What was the purpose of this visit? Was it just about the pictures to show an American president in the middle of a war zone? They like doing that. Or was there any substance to the trip? Well, a bit of both, to be fair. Biden took a walk through downtown Kiev. He was accompanied by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The US President paid a visit to St. Michael's Monastery and the Wall of Remembrance, where portraits of more than 4,500 soldiers are displayed. These are those who died when Russia annexed Crimea. Biden paid a tribute to these soldiers. Air sirens were sounded at that moment. So those were the optics. Now let's talk about the substance. Biden did not go to Kiev empty-handed. He announced a fresh round of military assistance to Ukraine, a package of $500 million. What does it entail? What will Ukraine get? More ammunition, javelins and howitzers, but no fighter jets. And that is the headline. No fighter jets for Ukraine. A fresh round of sanctions was also part of today's announcement.
Democracy stands. The Americans stand with you, and the world stands with you. Kyiv has captured a part of my heart, I must say. Together, we've committed nearly 700 tanks and thousands of armored vehicles, 1,000 artillery systems, more than 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition, more than 50 advanced launch rocket systems, anti-ship and air defense systems, all defend Ukraine, and that doesn't count the other $500 million we're announcing with you today and tomorrow. That's going to be coming your way.
Kiev would paint this visit as a victory, but they clearly want more. They won the jets. What about Joe Biden? Well, he got the timing right at least. His visit comes just before a major speech. Russian President Vladimir Putin will deliver an address tomorrow. Putin is expected to talk about the war, among other things. So Biden timed his visit to a day before that. And yet the moves of an adversary could upend Biden's plans. I'm talking about China. Is China entering the war in Ukraine? The US says it is. It says that China is all set to arm Russia. The statement comes from US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He met with his Chinese counterpart in Munich, and this is what he said.
We also had an opportunity to talk about the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We're here in Munich, and many of the countries here are focused, as we are, on that aggression. And one of the things that I shared with him was a growing concern on our part that China is considering providing lethal support to Russia in its aggression against Ukraine.
The US is warning China. It says any escalation will have serious consequences. What is China's response? It's being cagey. It says it won't accept quote-unquote finger-pointing and coercion from the United States. It called the American claims lies. But will it send weapons to Russia? No word on that. If China does, it would change everything. If China arms Russia, the implications will be wide-ranging. The Russian offensive will get a new lease of life. China's support might encourage Putin to make bold moves. The conflict itself could transform. The war in Ukraine is already being seen as a bit of a proxy battle. The West is arming Kiev. If China enters the fray, we'll have two superpowers on both sides. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea will be one bloc. The US and allies will be the other. And they'll have no option but to pump more weapons into Ukraine. And if that happens, a protracted war is all but certain. Let's break down these developments for you from every angle. We'll start with America. Over the weekend, Blinken was a man on a mission. He said China is ready to arm Russia, and he used every possible forum to broadcast this message. What is the basis of this claim? Apparently, some credible intelligence inputs. And if it happens, it won't be a surprise. You see, China is already helping Russia. It is supplying important technology to Moscow. It is giving equipment with distinct military applications. Do you know who is exporting these goods? China's state-owned defense companies. And who are they selling to? Russian manufacturers, Russian state-owned manufacturers. Let me tell you more about the kind of equipment that China has sent to Russia so far. And I have a list. Navigation equipment for shipping, jamming technology, parts for fighter jets, and semiconductors or chips. Russia is also buying Chinese drones. The ones that are commercially available, the Russians are buying them. The Russian forces use them with explosives. So that's how Beijing has helped Moscow so far. They haven't sent any arms directly, but they've fulfilled important needs of the Russian military. All this equipment is technically meant for civilian use, but it serves more purposes. It can be reprocessed for the military. So you can say that so far the support was covert, but now China could expand the support. The US says China is planning to send lethal weapons to Russia.
Lethal support. What would that entail? What do you think?
Weapons.
That's ammunition. That's
Primarily weapons.
primarily.
There's a whole gamut of things that,
Yeah.
that fit in that category, for everything from ammunition to the weapons themselves.
So far, Beijing has called for a peaceful resolution. It has supported Russia quietly, but it did not share lethal weapons. Is China now prepared to cross that line? It's hard to say. In Munich, Chinese officials stuck to their old talking points.
趁火打劫，中国做的
The crisis in Ukraine is not what we want to see. We are deeply worried about the expansion and long-term effects of this war. Like all parties, we are deeply worried. China is not a party to the crisis in Ukraine, but we have not stood by and we have not done anything to add fuel to the fire.
But Beijing could always deviate from that position. So here's a question. What's in it for China? Why would China arm Russia and further alienate the West? What are the immediate benefits for Beijing? Well, more influence over Russia for one. And that's a story in itself. How the Russia-China equation has changed. The Soviet Union, remember, was once China's big brother. Stalin famously made Mao wait for weeks for a meeting. But today, China holds the advantage. It's a bigger economy with more international clout. It is in a position to arm the Russians, and it can reinforce this advantage. But the bigger gain is long-term. Arm the Russians, prolong the conflict, and bog America down with an endless war. The US and its allies will be tied up as Ukraine keeps increasing its demands, and this suits China. So it may work. But here's the flip side. Entering this war may also invite more Western sanctions. Can China afford that? They've just come out of a devastating third wave of the pandemic. Their economy depends on exports. They cannot afford to take a hit there. In 2021, exports made up about 20% of China's GDP. That should tell you something. Economic sanctions will deal a big blow to it. So the risk is high for Beijing. Dumping the zero-COVID playbook came with huge costs. Can Xi Jinping afford another gamble? Again, it's hard to say, given how unpredictable he is. But if the past is any proof, we say expect the unexpected. Meanwhile, in the east, another conflict is intensifying. The Korean peninsula is tense. North Korea is firing one missile after another. Today, it launched 2 ballistic missiles. And this was Pyongyang's second test in 3 days. These tests came with an ominous threat. Kim Jong-un's sister has spoken out. Her name is Kim Yo-jong. Listen to what she said. The frequency of using the Pacific Ocean as our shooting range depends on the nature of the U.S. military's actions. Let me repeat that. She says Pyongyang is using the Pacific as its shooting range. What is the U.S. military doing? More shooting. The U.S. is conducting military drills in the region, 2 separate drills with 2 regional powers, Japan and South Korea. Looks like a chicken and egg situation. Who instigated whom here? And why is this escalation happening now? Let's start with North Korea. Their missile tests are a frequent affair. Provocation or no provocation, North Korea tests missiles. It conducts these tests for 3 reasons. Number 1, to improve its technology. Number 2, to send a message to rivals like the US. And number 3, to shore up loyalty at home, to make the Kims look tough. You may remember how the year began for them. Kim Jong-un started 2023 with a pledge. He wants to, quote-unquote, exponentially increase North Korea's arsenal. And he's been chasing these goals for the past few years. He wants 2 things, basically, more tactical nuclear weapons and higher yield of nuclear bombs. What does that mean? What is higher yield? Yield is the amount of energy a bomb can release. So the higher the energy, the more lethal the bomb. Essentially, Kim wants a more powerful bomb for North Korea, and he may be on course to achieving this goal. This month, Pyongyang hosted a massive parade. We told you about it. The event was in news because of Kim's daughter, Kim Joo-ae. Her appearance fueled speculation. She is now being seen as a potential successor to her father. But that wasn't the only highlight of the parade. The second headline was this missile, the Hwasong-17. The Hwasong-17 is North Korea's biggest missile yet. Reports say it can travel as far as 15,000 kilometers. And that is enough to reach the United States, 15,000 kilometers. And the other worry is this. The missile is an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. ICBMs are mainly designed for nuclear bombs. Some carry just 1 warhead. The newer versions are more advanced. A modern-day ICBM can carry multiple warheads. What about the North Korean ICBMs? How much can they pack? There is no independent assessment yet, but the US and its allies are not underestimating Pyongyang. Japan, meanwhile, wants the United Nations to intervene.
From the launch on the 18th, it is clear that North Korea is pursuing the practical application of ICBM-class ballistic missiles. The series of actions taken by North Korea is absolutely unacceptable as it threatens the peace and security of our region and the international community.
Tokyo says North Korea will conduct more tests in the future. In Seoul, politicians are calling for nukes. There is a strong support for the idea now in South Korea. Consider what the head of the ruling party said. His name is Chung Jin-suk. And I'm quoting, "We must first secure concrete nuclear deterrence. We need to strengthen our kill chain so North Korea can never rise to its feet again if it uses nukes on the Korean peninsula." Now, what is a kill chain? It is a reference to a preemptive strike capability. That's a kill chain. If the South feels that a nuclear attack from the North is imminent, it will try to, quote-unquote, decapitate the Kims. It will strike at the leadership of North Korea, kill the Kims. What about the United States? What will the US do in the event of a North Korean attack? The US promises ironclad support to South Korea and Japan. But then again, these are all just promises and scenarios. The fact of the matter is, Kim Jong-un is ramping up his arsenal. Every missile test shrinks the scope of a diplomatic solution. Vantage continues after a short break.
This morning, it is not like information was trickling in either from the US White House administration or from media reports in the US about the possibility of Biden, touching down in Kiev. But now you can see those live pictures of US President Joe Biden in Kiev, meeting with Zelensky as well as other senior leaders of the Ukrainian government. He's going to spend a few hours there and then make his way towards.
It was a day of high drama in Pakistan. At the center of it was former Prime Minister Imran Khan. He has made some very powerful enemies lately, including the all-powerful Pakistani military. Now, Imran Khan has many cases against him. He's out on bail. Last year, he was disqualified from contesting elections. His supporters were behind violent protests outside the Election Commission's office, and he's out on bail in that case. Today was the bail hearing. He reached the Lahore High Court with his supporters and party men. And this is what followed. And there's more news from Pakistan, in fact. The economic crisis is worsening by the day. Manufacturers are shutting shop, factories are winding up operations, imports are stranded at sea, and Pakistan has gone bankrupt. Not my words. This is what their defense minister said.
आपने सुना होगा डिफॉल्ट हो रहा है या दिवालिया हो रहा है या मेल्टडाउन हो रहा है वो हो चुका हुआ है कि जो हमारे मुल्क के इस वक्त हालात है हम दिवालिया मुल्क के रहने वाले हैं.
Quite a candid admission by Khwaja Asif there. He called Pakistan a bankrupt country. There are many telltale signs of this meltdown. Look at the auto sector. Car sales have crashed, down by 65% in January compared to the same period last year. This is the lowest in almost 3 years. Car maker Suzuki has been on a rough ride in Pakistan. In the past 2 months, Suzuki has had to shut its plant 5 times. In the past 6 months, the plant has remained shut for about 40 days. The latest shutdown could last beyond tomorrow. What's the reason behind the shutdowns? The company says a constant shortage of parts and components is to blame for this. Then we have the Indus Motor Company. It manufactures Toyota vehicles in Pakistan. Just this month, it had to shut down its plant for 2 weeks. The reason? The company faces major hurdles in importing raw materials. It says banks are not helping. They're not giving clearances for its consignments to be imported. And why are Pakistan's banks making life so difficult for manufacturers? You see, the Pakistani rupee is depreciating in value against the US dollar. $1 roughly equals 261 Pakistani rupees now. The depreciating value of Pakistani currency has made imports very expensive because global trade takes place largely in American dollars. Pakistan's automobile sector is in peril, and the people are the ones bearing the cost. Do you know how many people have lost their jobs because of these shutdowns? Around 300,000 Pakistanis who were directly or indirectly involved with the automobile sector now have no jobs. Next, we come to the mobile phone makers. Reports say major multinational players have halted their operations. Why? Because these companies do not own enough dollars to send to their head offices. Again, Pakistan's negligible forex reserves are to blame for this. Dollars are the new gold in Pakistan, and they're facing a real shortage of it. The impact has been wide-ranging. I'll give you an example. Pakistan's Drug Regulatory Authority is getting a lot of letters these days. Pharma companies say they cannot continue production. Not one or two. Over 3 dozen pharma companies say they don't have raw materials to make medicines. In fact, there's a whole list of companies that have either shut down or slowed down their operations in Pakistan. And these companies belong to a variety of sectors, from agriculture to pharma to even furniture. So Pakistan's manufacturing sector is taking a big hit, and 2 main reasons for that: no raw materials and low demand. Let me explain how this works. Pakistan is running critically low on forex reserves. That's foreign exchange. You need this money to import goods and services. In Pakistan, forex reserves have shrunk to just about $3 billion. That won't even cover imports for 3 weeks. So they don't have money. What do? They curb imports, and the result is this. Containers are stranded at sea and at ports. These containers carry raw materials. The raw materials that manufacturers need, the raw materials that factories need. They're stuck. And the factories are not getting them, so they can't produce their goods. Then we have the low demand. Inflation is sky high in Pakistan. Everything is very expensive. So even if manufacturers make the goods, who is going to buy them? Citizens are struggling to get essentials. Milk costs more than 250 rupees a litre. Chicken costs almost 800 rupees. These are basic necessities. They now become luxuries in Pakistan, a luxury which many people can't seem to afford.
We have to skip meals now. Sometimes we don't have lunch. Other times we don't have breakfast. We used to feed our children a proper diet, but not now. I now cook chicken only once a month. My children want to eat biryani, but we can't afford it.
Amid all of this, Pakistan decided to send aid to Turkey. The world should be praising this noble gesture, but it isn't. Do you know why? Because Pakistan again tried to pull a fast one. Last year, it suffered severe floods. The world sent aid. Turkey also sent aid to Pakistan. And here is what they've done. Pakistan has repackaged Turkish humanitarian aid and sent it back to Ankara. Pakistan's own consignments have exposed it. The outer packaging says this is Pakistani aid, but the boxes inside say that the material has been sent by Turkey. And this comes just days after the Pakistani Prime Minister was told not to visit the quake-hit country. It's one embarrassment after another for Pakistan. The cost of living crisis is taking its toll on the world. In Moldova, thousands protested against their government. They said the bills were so high they'd much rather have Russia take over their country. In Singapore, people are abandoning their pets. But the worst hit seems to be the United Kingdom, the only major economy expected to shrink in 2023. The IMF says Britain will do worse than Russia, and that's saying a lot. So what is the government doing to ease the pressure? Taking inspiration from India, it seems. From the midday meal scheme for school children, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan plans to offer free meals to every primary school student, irrespective of household income. India has had such a scheme for years, the largest of its kind in the world. Here's a report.
The cost of living crisis in the UK has pushed families to the brink. While inflation eased in January, it was still 10.1%. That's overall inflation. Food inflation levels were at 16.7%. Inflation for housing and bills was at a whopping 26.7%. These are costs everyone has to bear. Thousands of households are surviving on government benefits, and they're becoming increasingly dependent on food banks. These are run by charitable organizations and provide free food. They've seen a 90% increase in demand compared to a year ago.
I know that teachers are using food banks. That's not right. Just like the nurses, completely the same. It's not right for anybody to not be getting a proper living wage that isn't matching how everything's gone up.
To combat this dire situation, London's mayor has come up with a plan. Sadiq Khan has proposed free meals to all primary schools children in London. This would mean free meals to about 270,000 children. It would cost over $150 million. Is this the first step of its kind in the UK? No. Children from poorer households are already entitled to free meals at school. The new plan makes it universal. It's expected to benefit over 100,000 children in London. It's similar to India's midday meal scheme. Some quick facts. India's midday meal scheme is the largest nutritional program for school children in the world. About 120 million primary school children benefit from the scheme, and it's been around for decades. The scheme was first conceived in pre-independent India in 1925. It was implemented statewide in Tamil Nadu as early as 1962. It was launched at the national level in 1995. The scheme has helped provide relief to millions of families in India. London may now reap similar benefits. Of course, the UK isn't the only country struggling with the cost of living crisis. It's manifesting in different ways across the world. We'll take two more cases, Moldova and Singapore. Moldova is Ukraine's neighbor. Its president recently accused Russia of instigating protests to topple the government. On Sunday, thousands of demonstrators turned up at the capital. They said the cost of living is so high, they'd much rather have Russia take over.
We are here because of the pensions. They said they will increase the pensions.
Did the Shore party call you to come? Elon Shore?
We can't live like this anymore.
In Singapore, the cost of living crisis is affecting more than just humans. Rising costs have made it difficult for people to take care of their pets. Some pets are being donated to shelters or pet adoption services. Many are being abandoned. This is illegal in Singapore. People can be jailed for up to a year and fined about $7,500. Yet authorities say they're investigating about 38% more abandonment cases than a year ago. Whether through legal means or abandonment, Singaporeans are giving up on their furry friends. Inflation isn't sparing anyone, human or otherwise.
A new cancer is spreading through America. It doesn't harm the body, but it cripples lives and livelihoods. I'm talking about the cancer of debt. Look at this headline. US credit card debt now totals nearly $1 trillion. American households are in distress. They have put almost $1 trillion on credit cards, which is a record, an all-time high. How much credit card debt do Americans owe? A whopping $986 billion. That's an increase of $130 billion from last year. What's the average debt of a household? Around $6,500. This is what Americans owe to credit companies. How many are affected? At the end of 2022, more than 18 million borrowers were behind on their credit card bills, which is an alarming number. Credit card debt is the worst form of borrowing. It attracts a high interest rate. In the case of the US, around 20% on average, which is a very high number. And the latest figures show that Americans are caught in a debt trap. The question is why? Why are Americans putting so much money on credit cards? Because they're struggling to make ends meet. High inflation is hurting monthly budgets. Inflation in the US is around 8%. The target for the US Federal Reserve, their central bank, the American central bank, the US Federal Reserve Bank, their target is 2%. So inflation is 3 times higher than the target. Plus, the Fed has increased interest rates. So rates for borrowing have gone up, and that is making things worse because anyone with a loan will end up paying more. The credit card situation is just a symptom. The real problem is much bigger. America's total household debt is also at a record high. They owe $16.9 trillion. This includes all kinds of loans, credit card debt, home loans, car loans, you name it. $16.9 trillion in debt. Americans are struggling to make ends meet. I'll show you more numbers. These are from last year. Nearly 65% Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. The middle class is hurting the most. More than 80% of them cut down on their savings. Either they saved less every month or they dipped into their savings to survive. This could have a big impact on America's economy. Consumer spending is 70% of the US GDP. So if households spend less, the US economy will decline. And this is an indictment of the US president. He's failing to address one of the biggest problems that Americans face today. That is debt. And this is not just about personal finance. In America, debt is part of the popular culture. Most students graduate with a student loan. Going by one claim, 45 million Americans have student loan debt. That's about 1 in 5 US adults. In 2015, more than 100 million Americans had an auto loan. 114 million Americans have borrowed to buy a home. Long story short, America has a debt problem, one that it is yet to recognize and address. Biden's visit to Kiev has created waves. But will Americans support this war if they cannot pay their own bills? Expect the president to face tough scrutiny at home. Meanwhile, the Taliban are looking for investors. They're talking about setting up special economic zones, and military bases are a part of their plan. These are foreign military bases, the ones that housed American soldiers and ammunition. Almost 2 years back, the Taliban took control. They also took over the weapons left behind by the Western forces. What happened to them? And what happened to the bases? Our next report tells you what Afghanistan's terror regime is planning next. The Taliban have made an announcement. They have plans to redo their foreign military bases. Once occupied by the US to house soldiers and ammunition, Kabul now wants to make it into an attractive destination for investors. In short, they want to create special economic zones. What are special economic zones? These are designated regions or zones that have a set of different economic laws, more liberal than the rest of the country. The aim is to promote investments, create jobs, and boost the economy. Afghanistan's Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs, Mullah Baradar, has given the go-ahead. The details of the plan are not public yet. Taliban officials say the pilot plan will begin in Kabul and in the northern Balkh province. This includes the famous Bagram Air Base. It's a former Soviet facility. It was the largest US military base during Washington's 2-decade stay. Located around 70 kilometers north of Kabul, it reportedly housed close to 20,000 American troops at one point. So how many bases are we talking about? On last count, Afghanistan had a total of 700 military bases. 400 of them reportedly belonged to the US and its allies. Then the US withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021. It shut these bases, left aircraft, vehicles, and weapons worth $7 billion. President Biden had some tough questions to answer at home.
I do not believe whatsoever what you're saying about the administration not working to manipulate that intelligence. To me, that is the most logical explanation of how so many in the intelligence community got this so wrong about what was going to happen in Afghanistan. Why it would seem somehow logical for President Biden to leave the, quote, most advanced military weaponry, why some would not speak out against that if they were getting the false intelligence because it was coming from the top down to manipulate it. In my opinion, that's absolutely aid and comfort to the enemy.
Needless to say, US weapons then fell into the hands of the Taliban, who did not need a second invitation. As for the bases, many became parking spots. Now Kabul wants to change that. It wants businesses and trade centers to function in the military bases. It says that is to promote economic growth and development. But why now? It's because of the mess that Afghanistan is in. The Taliban's return in 2021 marked the beginning of a humanitarian and financial crisis. The United Nations estimates that more than 70% of the population needs humanitarian assistance. That's around 28 million Afghans. More than 6 million are a step away from famine. Citizens are struggling to survive. Afghanistan's economy is much worse. It is one of the world's most aid-dependent countries. Aid makes up about 40% of Afghanistan's GDP and 75% of the government spending. Donors invested as much as $65 billion in grants since 2002. But the Taliban's return changed everything. The new government in Kabul faced a slew of sanctions. The US froze the Afghan central bank's assets worth $7 billion. The pandemic and the war in Ukraine just added to the troubles. As a result, the economy shrunk. The World Bank says it contracted by close to 30 to 35% between 2021 and 2022. But Kabul wants to keep the cash flow going, and the creation of special economic zones is just one step in that direction. The Taliban also wants to use natural resources to its advantage. Reports peg the value of Afghanistan's natural resources at more than $1 trillion. In fact, last month the Taliban said it planned to sign a contract with Chinese firms. The aim is to drill for oil in parts of northern Afghanistan. This is said to be the first major energy extraction agreement since 2021, one that will help get in revenue. But here's the catch. Taliban is no elected government, and Afghanistan is no democracy. Welfare for the people is perhaps the last on their priority, if at all. As for the dreams of foreign investments, those may remain pipe dreams. Reports say even the Chinese are now weighing their options carefully. This was after a series of attacks on hotels popular among Chinese businessmen. The attacks happened last year. The Islamic State took responsibility. Afghanistan still remains a dangerous country. For starters, it is run by a bunch of terrorists. Convincing businesses amidst this will be a Herculean task. Do you remember quiet quitting? It means doing the bare minimum at your job. It dominated the mood of the post-pandemic workforce. But it's so last year. Our next story is about another quiet hiring. After all, it is screaming the loudest this year. But what does it mean? If you're a manager, it means you're acquiring more talent without hiring more people. You move your current team to newer roles, you give them different positions, you assign them more projects internally, expand their KRA, as it were, key responsibility area. If you're a worker, it means more work. It's the opposite of quiet quitting. There, you had to do the bare minimum to keep your job. Here, you go above and beyond your job description. Like it or not, this is the new workplace trend. And while most people are already complaining, quiet hiring has some benefits too. Employers definitely love the idea. It saves the company time, money, and resources. It also increases flexibility because resources are deployed quickly. But what's in it for employees? Well, you can learn new skills, you can become more engaged and productive. Also, this method may sound backward, but it's brilliant in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. And this is not even an industry secret. It's a tried and tested method. I can tell you that in the news business, it's been around forever. When you walk into the office, you have no idea what's coming your way. It's challenging, but it's fun. Now it seems to be spreading across the board. The question is, why now? And the answer is this: the world faces an economic slowdown. There is pressure on companies. They must keep their costs down, and one of the big costs is the talent bill. Companies are cutting it. Just look at the mass layoffs. The year has just begun, and 297 tech companies have laid off nearly 95,000 workers. At this rate, there could be more than 900,000 job cuts this year. That's nearly 6 times the total for the industry in 2022. And the hiring landscape is even more competitive, especially after the great resignation of the pandemic. That's when about 48 million people quit. They quit their jobs in 2021. So organizations had to become more creative. They had to use the remaining staff to do all the work. Well, that's quiet hiring for you. It may be working for the bosses, but it's frustrating a lot of workers. Many don't want to transition into roles they aren't interested in. Others say it reduces their agency. After all, added work is not something they signed up for. Many end up getting burnt out. Workers are often expected to go beyond their job without the perks. No increased pay, no bonus. And where does this leave the quiet quitters? Well, in a spot, because now you're expected to work in overdrive, not in cruise control. Now to the obvious question: will doing your own work well invite more work? Is this the punishment for being a talented hard worker? Well, experts say not necessarily. It can be a win-win situation, depends how you look at it. Tackling new assignments can expand your skill set. It can make you a more well-rounded employee. And since the brightest minds are chosen to do more, it can also boost your morale. It can help workers network with colleagues from other business areas, and who knows, maybe you'll find new areas of interest. Maybe you'll discover potential you did not know that you had. But what about the money? It's only fair to expect a pay raise. But given the environment, it may not always happen. So ask for other benefits like a bonus or flexible hours or additional time off. You see, the workplace is changing. The way we work is changing. Mass layoffs are a daily story. The economy is under pressure. Work from home is ending. It's all a glorious flux. So prepare yourself for change. Arm yourself with the right tools and be tough mentally. Staying the course may be the key to success this year. And paying the bill may be the key to accessing social media this year. First Twitter, now Facebook and Instagram. They want you to pay. What for? For blue check marks and the verified title. Does this mean you lose your account if you don't pay? How much money are they asking for? And why are they asking for money after promising to keep the platform free? Our next report answers all these questions and more. Social media was once called the great enabler, a free space that enables all. It wasn't ever free though. It cost you time, your data, and your peace of mind, among other things. Well, now it will also cost you money. Meta wants you to pay. Meta is the company that controls Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. It wants money from users. And what is it offering in return? A blue check mark, the one that tells the world you've got a verified account. There's also a promise of higher reach. Your posts will be seen by more people. What will this cost you? $12 to $15 a month. The announcement came on Sunday. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, said, and I quote, "This new feature is about increasing authenticity and security across our services." Not sure about that, but Zuckerberg has definitely increased the burden on users. Meta Verified will be rolled out in Australia and New Zealand this week. Then it will gradually be launched around the world. Anybody can now get verified. All they need to do is provide a government ID. Meta has promised verified users some perks. They'll get protection against impersonation, they'll get direct access to customer care, and most importantly, their reach and engagement will increase. But talking about promises, if you happen to have a look at the Facebook homepage before 2019, you would have come across a promise, one where Facebook declared that the site was free and always will be. Well, the always ends now. You must pay for a verified account and a blue check mark. But what if you don't pay? Will you then lose your account? You can still use the platform, but you won't be playing in the big league. Where does that leave you? Behind the crowd. The level playing field, if there ever was one, is now being demolished. On a platform like Instagram, where individual content creation has taken off in a big way, this could impact the reach of many influencers, especially those influencers who don't have the capacity to give $15 every month. It's pretty simple now. If you want better reach, if you want more people to view your content, and if you want higher engagement, you have to pay. If you don't, you'll be at a natural disadvantage. But why has Meta walked back on its promise to always stay free? The answer is a year, 2022. It was a particularly harsh year for the tech industry. Big tech was no exception. Late last year, Meta let go of 13% of its workforce. 11,000 employees were laid off, and it plans to lay off more. Meta has reportedly ranked 7,000 existing employees as subpar. They could end up losing their jobs. 2022 was also a year of realization for social media companies. They realized that they could not depend entirely on ad revenues to keep their ship afloat. Meta's ad revenues declined for the first time last year. Advertising revenue made up 98% of their total earnings last year. So its scheme of charging users for verification is in fact aimed at shoring up non-ad revenues. The same story at Twitter. The company's ad revenues fell by 71% in December last year. Right after Elon Musk's takeover, Twitter's ad revenues fell by 55%. And this is a company that depends on ad sales for 90% of its revenue. Elon Musk was quick to respond. He repackaged Twitter Blue and made it available to anyone who was willing to pay $8 every month. The idea is to cut dependence on advertisers. Now, there might be another reason why Meta wants to diversify its revenue portfolio. After all, advertisers will not like a large chunk of their money to be spent on one man alone. Here's what happened. Meta has said it is increasing its spending on Mark Zuckerberg. Why? To make sure he's safe. So far, Meta was spending $10 million on Zuckerberg's personal safety. Now that amount has been increased to $14 million. It's a hike of 40%. Zuckerberg can use the money for additional personal, equipment, services, and residential improvement. The blue check mark is not what it used to be. It was once a status symbol. Back in the day, you earned it. Now, all you have to do is pay for it. Imagine being alone in an art gallery. You're surrounded by the quiet, but colors of impressively crafted sculptures are screaming. A particular piece draws you in. The guard is nowhere to be seen. All you want to do is touch that artwork, get a deeper sense of the colors and textures. How much attention are you paying to the sign? You know, the sign which says, please do not touch the artwork. More often than not, it's ignored, and this is what happens. A small sculpture valued at a whopping $42,000 has been broken. This blue sculpture, it belongs to the renowned artist Jeff Koons. It was part of his iconic Dog Balloon series. It was displayed at a VIP-only opening at a Miami art gallery. A woman, an art collector, gave it a little tap. The artwork fell and shattered to smithereens. They say every dog has its day. Maybe that's all that this dog had. You know how a car crash on a highway draws a huge crowd? The aftermath of the sculpture crash resembled that. Bemused guests gathered around the shots. Some filmed the scene on their phones. And the culprit? Well, she said she wanted to disappear. Who wouldn't? But this is not the first time art has been damaged, and it probably isn't the last. An American tourist smashed two priceless sculptures in the Vatican last year, one in anger, the other accidentally. In 2020, a man sat on a historic sculpture and broke off its delicate toes, accidentally. For the art elite, touching displayed art is horrifyingly wrong. But in reality, we touch art all the time. Just look at the art pieces to see the damage, scratches, scuffs, drawings, and even gum and trash deposited in crevices. Spectacular attacks of damage are rare, but smaller acts of damage are routine. In fact, a security guard at the British Museum once said, for every 100 people he stops from touching the art, there are 200 more that he cannot catch. He called it trying to turn back the sea. But why do people do it? Well, some do it to express appreciation. Touching art heightens that experience. Others are simply expressing distaste. How do the museums see this? They call these acts mistakes. But what would they call this? Protesters defiling art. In the last few months, we've seen this across the world. They throw soup at paintings. They touch art aggressively. They topple statues honoring enslavers. And that's not all. Art has suffered vandalism. Da Vinci's Mona Lisa was attacked by acid and rocks. An Ilya Repin painting was slashed with a metal pole. Examples seem endless. Artwork has been punched, stabbed, slashed with a meat cleaver and lit on fire. These are, of course, aggressive examples of connecting with art. The thing is, art demands reaction. It provokes it. And it all starts with a simple tap on the sculpture. Experts have spent years investigating this. What motivates visitors to touch exhibits without permission? What do they choose to touch? How does this unauthorized act make them feel? Sometimes it's our inherent desire to learn more, our curiosity. Sometimes it's a sense of power. Look at the Renaissance paintings. They show gods and mortals. It looks like the painting must be revered. It keeps us at a distance. So we must get closer. Other times, art feels so out of the world. You must touch it to make sure it's real. But all in all, humans seek an emotional connection with art. Touching it is a simple way to achieve that. But our need to inspire connection can often cause harm. It sounds like an unhealthy relationship with art, doesn't it? Perhaps the best way to stay in touch with art is to stay out of touch with the artwork itself. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We start with Turkey, still picking up the pieces. The rescue effort has ended in all but two places. Amid the devastation, some birthday cheer for a 5-year-old girl. And carnivals across the world. In Italy, it's the Battle of Oranges, much like Holi in India and Tomatina in Spain. This event dates back to medieval times, we're told. In Colombia, it's the Battle of Flowers, one of the most popular parades in the country. And in Brazil, the world's biggest carnival, the showstopper was a Bollywood-style parade with Brazilians in traditional Indian clothes dancing to Indian music. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
Were not able to reach an agreement on external financing estimates and the precise domestic fiscal measures that need to go. Now, both sides agreed to a set of measures that could still help clinch the deal. Pakistan entered a $6 billion IMF program during Imran Khan's tenure in 2019. That package was increased to $7 billion last year. Currently, the 9th review is going on for the release of a little over $1 billion. But Pakistan's defense minister claims that the country has already defaulted. Khwaja Asif said that they are residents of a bankrupt country and that Pakistan has defaulted and there exists an economic meltdown in the country. Asif said that everyone, including the establishment, the bureaucracy, the politicians, they are all responsible for the current situation. And that the IMF does not have any solutions because they lie within the country.
आपने सुना होगा डिफॉल्ट हो रहा है या दिवालिया हो रहा है या मेल्टडाउन हो रहा है वो हो चुका हुआ है हमारे मुल्क के इस वक्त हालात है हम दिवालिया मुल्क के रहने वाले हैं हमें 200-300 मिलियन डॉलर के लिए मैंने खुद देखा है मिन्नतें करते हुए अपने हुक्मरानों को मैं उनके साथ होता हूं
So what exactly would happen if Pakistan were to actually default on its debt? For starters, the country will be unable to repay its commercial loans. The central bank will have turned down debt repayment to service payments to commercial lenders. This will, of course, trigger automatically a downgrading of the country's credit rating by agencies like Moody's and S&P and Fitch. The decrease in dollar inflows will further limit the country's ability to import essential items. This, in turn, will impact the economic output. Inflation, which is already sky high, will further skyrocket. So let's break down the economic meltdown of Pakistan in numbers. Pakistan's external debt servicing rose by 70% in the first 2 quarters of 2022-23. In the first half of the fiscal year, Pakistan paid a little over $10 billion in just servicing its external debt. Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves are dwindling. They're down to just $3 billion, which can barely cover 3 weeks of imports. Its fiscal deficit widened to 43%. The lack of fiscal prudence is one of the reasons why the IMF is delaying this release of a payout. The IMF has asked Islamabad to introduce austerity measures like an increase in energy costs, a jump in taxation rates, and a hike in key lending rates. Crisis hit Pakistan recorded a new high in inflation as it went past 38.5 last week. The Pakistani rupee against the dollar.
Salvatore Bazzi has become quite a popular voice in India, especially amongst speaking tours, the academics, the intelligentsia. He's an associate professor at the University of Sydney, and he's out with a new article titled Unholy Alliance, Inside the Activist Campaign to Pry India from the West. Salvatore Bazzi is joining us live and exclusively first here on CNN News 18. Salvatore, thanks a lot for coming in. And first, I want to begin by asking you, you've become quite a celebrity in India. How does that feel? You've been invited to, several events, speaking engagements. You've traveled a few cities now in India. How has your time been?
Look, it's been a pleasure, and the best part has been meeting people. Being on TV is a lot of fun, but the best part of it is that because you've been on television, then ordinary people recognize you, want to say hello, want to talk. And for me as a sociologist, it's been invaluable to have just that opportunity to meet people because they think they're familiar with me, they know me somehow, and it really has been wonderful.
there are a lot of people who, obviously like you, like what you say about India, the perspective that you bring on how India is being seen globally. But I think there are equal number of people who don't possibly like you that much because you're almost busting a narrative.
Well, if anyone doesn't like me, I haven't noticed because I've been received with really such open arms. But yes, I know, look, there must be people who resent being challenged with a narrative that they've monopolized for a long time. And I think Western knowledge of India has been monopolized by really just a half dozen people, columnists and intellectuals with access to Western media who've shaped the entire Western understanding of the country.
And that understanding is faulty, you would say?
I think it's not only faulty, it's largely false. That is, the quantitative data we have suggest a very different India from the qualitative understandings that we've received from this small group of journalists and intellectuals.
Before I get to your paper, Unholy Alliance Inside the Activist Campaign to Pry India from the West, I just want to take that point further. Do you believe that false analysis, the qualitative analysis in the hands of a few, half a dozen people and columnists overseas, is that a recent trend or has that existed? Because a lot of people believe that's predominantly anti-Modi activism.
I think it is mostly anti-Modi activism, but it's anti-Modi activism that has been translated into anti-India or anti-democracy narratives. That is, instead of challenging the government, they're challenging the state. We see that, for example, in challenging the independence of the Electoral Commission of India. Now, I've seen very little in India that suggests that the Electoral Commission has been compromised in any way. Yet the international narrative we've heard is the Electoral Commission has gone from being fully independent just 8 or 10 years ago to now being in the pocket of the government today. Now, I doubt that narrative is true, but that's what we hear. People are taking their personal subjective opinions and presenting it as objective fact.
Can I just ask you, you're coming to India, you've been in India at a time when George Soros's comments have been in the news. I'm sure you're aware of what he has said, not for the first time. But do you believe his comments, as they're being received, truly do blow the whistle on exactly what we've been talking about? That there is this group of individuals, including Indians, who are shaping
almost
this
exclusively
almost
Indians.
exclusively Indians, you believe, who are shaping this narrative, because many believe that George Soros doesn't even know much about India. What he's saying and what he believes about India and very little democracy in India is actually a narrative fed to him.
Look, I doubt George Soros knows much about Indian democracy, but he does know what he reads in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, which is then presented as factual accounts of Indian democracy. Yet those accounts are coming, again, I keep stressing this, from a very small number of primarily South Asian, primarily Indian voices who have very strongly held opinions on India. Now, I don't doubt the sincerity of those opinions that are being reported in these newspapers, but they come to be presented as fact to the rest of the world. And because we have no other source of information on India, we take it seriously. I mean, when you hear someone call American democracy now being a fascist dictatorship, the Republicans are fascists, the Democrats are fascists, you shrug your shoulders because you're very familiar with American democracy. You can make your own decisions. When a Westerner sees India called fascist in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or the New York Times, we take that seriously because we know very little about India. We have very little depth of knowledge. Most Americans couldn't name a single Indian leader, not even Narendra Modi. Those who could name Narendra Modi couldn't name a second one. Now, I challenge your viewers, almost every one of them could not only name Joe Biden, but could name the last 3 presidents of the United States and could probably name at least 2 or 3 governors and cabinet secretaries in the United States. Your knowledge of America is so deep, so deep that you're not swayed by these sorts of ridiculous statements about American democracy. But our knowledge of India is so shallow that if all we hear are these complaints, we take them seriously.
George Soros believes that there's a Hindu nationalist government under Narendra Modi in India, and he has in the past too expressed his view that, he wants this government out. I want to understand from you, and I think there are shades of this in your new paper, in your new article, that Hindu nationalism has been almost equated with fascism, with Nazism. Hindutva today is equated with Nazism. And there's very little proof to show that they're actually alike. Why do you think that is happening? And where is this coming from? Why are Hindu nationalists treated with such suspicion?
There's nothing in common between Hindutva and Nazism, and I think you can see that when you see what else is also compared to Nazism. We routinely see Zionism, that is Jews' desire to return to Israel as a form of Nazism or fascism, and that of course is absolutely ridiculous. The Nazi regime was as anti-Semitic, committed an anti-Semitic genocide. We see these terms thrown around because they're very emotional terms, and people want to associate things they disagree with in these emotional connections to absolute evil. Of course, this is pure rhetoric, but again, I stress to an American who knows nothing about India, this pure rhetoric becomes all that person knows about India, and that's why this is causing such problems. Now, let's be honest, the current government of India is strongly, deeply nationalistic, just as every government in the United States is deeply nationalistic, just as every major political party in India is nationalistic, and the current party is closely associated with Hinduism, just as every major political party in India is closely associated with Hinduism. So there's nothing, you can call it Hindu nationalist. I prefer not to put that label on it, but is it a is it a government that's Hindu in orientation? Yes. Is it a government that's nationalist in orientation? Yes. But I stress to Indians who may oppose the current government that someday if Congress comes back to power, Congress will be a Hindu-oriented government that will be highly nationalist. And if Indians accept this vilification of Hinduism and nationalism, they'll find this vilification sticks even when the BJP is gone.
Interestingly, what you also say in your paper is that there is a form of, as you said, anti-Zionism, anti-Hinduism that is being masked as anti-Hindutva activism. Because Hindutva is bad, we are not opposing Hinduism, we are opposing Hindutva. That's an argument we've heard from academics all around. In fact, there are organizations, academic organizations and groups in the US that hold seminars like Dismantle Global Hindutva. And the front is that this is against Hindutva. This is not against Hindus and Hinduism per se. Do you believe that is the truth?
Yeah, we've seen this playbook before. So in Western academia, there's a very strong strain of anti-Semitism. But after World War II, you couldn't be publicly anti-Semitic. So instead, this was translated into anti-Zionism. It's the same people, the same organizations, the same departments of the same universities that used to be openly anti-Semitic. They're now anti-Zionist. Well, now we're seeing those same elite institutions becoming anti-Hindutva. They can't be openly anti-Hindu, but they can be anti-Hindutva. And I think that anti-Hindutva message is simply the polite face of anti-Hinduism. And it's the same playbook as with anti-Zionism. Because you can't tell which anti-Zionists are really anti-Semites, you can say I'm anti-Zionist and get away with it. Because you can't tell which anti-Hindutva activists are really just anti-Hindu, you can say it and get away with it. But I think when you look at it, and you look at the people who are so vehemently anti-Hindutva, and you ask, why are you elite white American professor who has, or elite white British intellectual who have no connection with India, why are you so viscerally anti-Hindutva? And I can only trace it to the historical anti-Hinduism, which we know was historically present. All you have to do is look at the way Winston Churchill talked about Mahatma Gandhi to see this anti-Hinduism, this anti-Hindu bias among the elite upper crust in America and the United Kingdom. Well, they can't say they're anti-Hindu anymore, so they found a new way to say it.
Do you believe that the world globally is beginning to look at this in the manner that you see it, or there is a lobby that is very deeply protecting this form of new anti-Hinduism?
There are, of course, Hindu civil society organizations in the U.S. The Coalition of Hindus in North America and the Hindu American Foundation. They're trying to fight these efforts, but I think that they're up against a very strong opponent. Dr. Rajiv Malhotra has written quite a bit about this. They're up against an intellectual establishment that has been viscerally anti-Hindu since the days of colonialism, that is well entrenched, that has access to the top institutions, the top newspapers, the top magazines and journals in American and British society. And it's very difficult to fight this trend in the academy when they have control of the institutions. I mean, I've heard people in India say that, the establishment, the famous phrase, they're in government, we control the establishment. I don't know how true that really is in India, but it's very much true of the United States and United Kingdom.
I think people believe it's pretty much true in India. I mean, the global fight, which is the academia fight, is still very much true in India too, isn't it? That's what controls the narrative still today, and that's also what controls the history, for example. Yeah. History is a huge battle.
I don't know how true it is, but the Oxbridge and Ivy League elite very much control the establishment in the United States and UK.
In your article, you contend that Christian missionary and Islamist pressures are working behind the scenes in some of these reports we see over India, some of these rankings that routinely seem to be very terrible on India and term India as anti-Muslim or anti-religious freedom or religious expression. Explain that. Why do you believe that there is a nexus behind these rankings?
Well, so first let me contextualize it. Genocide Watch, international NGO, rates India one of the 10 most likely countries to experience a genocide in the 2020s.
Wow.
They claim that there is a 8% chance that there will be a genocide in India in 2023. Now look around you in India. Is there likely to be a genocide? I don't think so.
I really don't think so.
But this narrative has been built and built and built. And a lot of it has to do with these international religious freedom reports produced by the U.S. State Department and particularly by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, which puts together these reports on international religious freedom. Now, the reports compiled by the State Department on India focused almost entirely on complaints made by Christian missionaries. Because if you think about it, if a Muslim in India feels she's facing discrimination, is she likely to go to the U.S. State Department to complain? It's likely not. Okay. So of the hundreds of complaints made to the U.S. State Department about repression of religious freedom in India, fewer than 10, single-digit numbers, have to do with Muslims. 800 or more have to do with Christians.
Okay. And Christian missionaries.
It's all missionary related.
Yeah.
However, when the Pew Research Center did its international religious freedom rankings based on these reports, first, it rated India the worst country in the world. I'm emphasizing that. Worst in the world for social hostility to religion, meaning that people face more communal violence, more religious hostility in India than in Myanmar, which just had a genocide. I mean, the Rohingya were driven out of Myanmar. They're claiming the situation in India is worse than in Myanmar. That's all based on these U.S. State Department reports where all of the complaints are made by missionaries. Yet in their text narrative of their report, they only mention complaints
against Muslims.
Yeah. Okay. So they're taking a raw data that says Christians are facing repression in India. They're then writing a report that says India is the worst in the world for religious repression, and it's repression against Muslims. And then that narrative gets taken up. So all of the reports based on this Pew Research Center ranking says Muslims face increasing repression in India. Just look, India's been named worst in the world for repression. Now, we know quantitatively, there's been very good research on this, that anti-Christian violence in India is extremely rare. Okay, and the leading quantitative researcher of this, has said that it's rarer than anti-Semitism in the United States. Okay, so it exists.
Despite India's vast population difference.
In terms of per capita. Okay. So it exists in India, but it's very rare. So there are churches that have had vandalism on their church doors. We're not denying that. But it's rarer than synagogues in America facing, synagogues in America have been subject every 5 or 10 years to gun attacks. I mean, there's been very serious violence against Jews in the United States. Okay, so we have this situation where we know that violence against Christians is very low in India, yet it's been reported as if it's massive because Christian missionaries in India use the State Department to complain. And then these Christian complaints are used by Islamist organizations and intellectuals who are sympathetic to the Islamist agenda to make it out as if there's going to be a Muslim genocide in India. Thus the strange bedfellows or unholy alliance aspect of the report.
days and they left without promising any bailout. The talks hit a snag as both sides were not able to reach an agreement on external financing estimates and the precise domestic fiscal measures that need to go. Now, both sides agreed to a set of measures that could still help clinch the deal. Pakistan entered a $6 billion IMF program during Imran Khan's tenure in 2019. That package was increased to $7 billion last year. Currently, the 9th review is going on for the release of a little over $1 billion. But Pakistan's defense minister claims that the country has already defaulted. Khwaja Asif said that they are residents of a bankrupt country and that Pakistan has defaulted and there exists an economic meltdown in the country. Asif said that everyone, including the establishment, the bureaucracy, the politicians, they are all responsible for the current situation. And that the IMF does not have any solutions because they lie within the country.
आपने सुना होगा डिफॉल्ट हो रहा है या दिवालिया हो रहा है या मेल्टडाउन हो रहा है वो हो चुका हुआ है हमारे मुल्क के इस वक्त हालात है हम एक दिवालिया मुल्क के रहने वाले हैं हमें 200-300 मिलियन डॉलर के लिए मैंने खुद देखा है मिन्नतें करते हुए अपने हुक्मरानों को मैं उनके साथ होता हूं
So what exactly would happen if Pakistan were to actually default on its debt? For starters, the country will be unable to repay its commercial loans. The central bank will have turned down debt repayment to service payments to commercial lenders. This will, of course, trigger automatically a downgrading of the country's credit rating by agencies like Moody's and S&P and Fitch. The decrease in dollar inflows will further limit the country's ability to import essential items. This, in turn, will impact the economic output. Inflation, which is already sky high, will further skyrocket. So let's break down the economic meltdown of Pakistan in numbers. Pakistan's external debt servicing rose by 70% in the first 2 quarters of 2022-23. In the first half of the fiscal year, Pakistan paid a little over $10 billion in just servicing its external debt. Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves are dwindling. They're down to just $3 billion, which can barely cover 3 weeks of imports. Its fiscal deficit widened to 43%. The lack of fiscal prudence is one of the reasons why the IMF is delaying this release of a payout. The IMF has asked Islamabad to introduce austerity measures like an increase in energy costs, a jump in taxation rates, and a hike in key lending rates. Crisis hit Pakistan recorded a new high in inflation as it went past 38.5 last week. The Pakistani rupee against the dollar is another indicator of how bad things are. The exchange rate right now is 262 Pakistani rupees to the dollar. The Shahbaz Sharif government has imposed massive new taxes. It's also increased prices of 34 items, including that of fuel. Petrol right now in Pakistan costs 272 rupees, Pakistani rupees per litre. Milk costs just as much. It's 250 rupees a litre for a packet of milk. 320 rupees for a kilogram of curd. Eggs, again, 310 rupees for a dozen eggs in Pakistan. Chicken is selling at 780 rupees for a kg. Rice is selling at 160 rupees a kg. And flour, wheat flour, is selling at 150 to 175 per kilogram. So former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan appeared in the Lahore High Court today for a hearing on his bail application in a case linked to violent protests outside the Election Commission last year. While Imran Khan ended up getting bail, there was a fair share of drama outside the High Court. His convoy was showered with rose petals as it made its way inside the High Court premises. There were a large number of PTI supporters surrounding with cars, chanting slogans of support. Imran Khan, who was on a wheelchair because of being shot in the leg during a rally in November, reached there a little past 6 o'clock in the evening, but he only made it inside the courtroom a good 90 minutes later because his convoy faced difficulty in moving because of the large number of lawyers and supporters who had gathered there. So what exactly is this case that has left Imran Khan in the dock? A terrorism case was filed against Imran in October of 2022. This is after PTI workers took to the streets and held demonstrations outside the Election Commission of Pakistan. The PTI leadership had encouraged these protests after the apex poll body disqualified Imran Khan from holding public office in the Toshakhana case. The protests snowballed into clashes between the protesters and the police in cities like Islamabad, Karachi, Peshawar. There were also multiple instances of vandalism reported during these protests. But Imran Khan is just another factor adding to the growing instability in Pakistan that fundamentally stems from its economic crisis. Today, the International Monetary Fund warned that Pakistan must take steps to ensure that its high earners pay taxes and only the poor get subsidies. In an interview with a German television channel, IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva has said that it shouldn't be that wealthy in Pakistan benefit from subsidies. It should instead be the poor who benefit from subsidies. Those who are making good money need to contribute to the economy. Pakistan needs to be able to function like a normal country and not get into a dangerous place where its debt
You also say that organizations like the Pew Research is not technically anti-India. They don't have any bias against India. They don't have any bias against Hindus, for example, but their methodology is so bad. One is picking up these reports from US state departments, which obviously have a tone which is more Christian missionary complaints. I don't know why they still base their reports on this. It's so obvious that this is not going to be good data for them. The other is also the way you give points, for example. If Christian missionaries in India face any violence, there is a reason for that, but they will not rate it in the same manner as they would rate, for example, any actual communal crime. You know, the fact that they look at an attack on a Christian missionary in the same way as they would look at any other violence, don't you think even that is problematic? The whole methodology is problematic.
Look, there are small problems with methodology, but I don't want to focus on those technical. There are technical problems with the methodology. But we don't have to rely on these primarily qualitative rankings based on reports of journalists and NGOs because we have hard survey data about religious freedom in India. Ironically, it comes from the same Pew Research Center, but from a different group at the Pew Research Center. And this hard survey data shows us that violence or discrimination against Muslims and Christians in India reported by actual Muslims and Christians in India is very rare. The Pew Research Center did an extraordinarily high-quality survey in 2019-2020 of 29,999 households in India. I think they wish they'd gotten just one more, 29,999. Top-quality survey, more than an 85% response rate, which in survey research is unheard of. You have to really try hard to get an 85% response rate. This wasn't a telephone or a internet survey. This was knocking on doors, personally talking to people in 17 different languages, all across India. They found that 89% of Christians and 89% of Muslims say they are, quote unquote, very free to practice their religion in India. Only 2% of each group say they are unfree. Okay, so only a tiny minority of Christians and Muslims have any complaint about their ability to freely practice religion in India. So we have the hard survey data. We don't have to rely on these anecdotal reports. We can go to the numbers.
And yet the same Pew Research group doesn't look at its own data. It looks at these reports by the US State Department.
Because I think there are different motivations of different groups within Pew. Now, my instinct is, I can't know this, my instinct is that Pew actually commissioned this major quantitative study to back up its qualitative reports.
But it didn't happen.
But it didn't happen. So the Sir John Templeton Foundation, which is the foundation that funds Pew's international religious freedom efforts, they're closely linked to Christian missionary groups. And so they have a particular interest in defending missionaries abroad. That's not explicitly what they do, but they fund a lot of work that is pro-missionary, supportive of missionaries.
You know, recently there have been hashtags about a genocide in India, for example, that India is so anti-Muslim that there's so much widespread violence against Muslims that they can't literally live in India without fear.
Everyone thinks that India's Muslims are on the verge of a genocide except India's Muslims.
Yeah, exactly.
India's Muslims, when asked what are the top problems you face today, number one is unemployment.
Exactly.
Number two is crime. Number three is corruption. Intercommunal violence is number 4. Okay, so India's own Muslims do not rate intercommunal tension
as their number one problem. Fundamentally, the point is that a few activists, academics are creating a narrative about India that average people, Hindus, Muslims, Christians alike in India, do not subscribe to. They are not the ones who are building this narrative. It's a handful of people.
And I always want to emphasize this with the work I've been doing on India and with my speaking to the Indian press and to Indian people. In all of this, Indian Muslims are not to blame for this narrative.
Exactly.
This is not a narrative that is coming from ordinary Indian Muslims. It may come from some Muslim politicians or Muslim leaders in India. It may come from a lot of Hindu politicians and Hindu leaders in India. It is not coming from ordinary Muslims in India. Ordinary Muslims in India, from all the data we have, are very happy to be Indian, respect Hindus, that is, they say, again, more than 90% of Indians of every major religion, according to the Pew Research, more than 90% of Indians of every major religion agree with the statement that respecting other people's religions is fundamental to what it means to be Indian.
Exactly.
India's Muslims respect India's Hindus, and India's Hindus respect India's Muslims. And whatever we see on Twitter, whatever we see in these reports, it's all the narrative of a small number of cranky people. I'm serious. This is not what we see in the data when we talk to real people.
Finally, Salvatore Bazzi, let me ask you, you've spent some time in India, you're researching Indian democracy. What would you like to leave our viewers with? What is your take on Indian democracy, especially in such a vitiated atmosphere today, at least in the media or in terms of academia, which loves to bash Indian democracy? For them, a lot of Indian democracy actually doesn't exist. We are some sort of an autocracy, elected autocracy. What is your take on Indian democracy?
Look, all the quantitative and all the objective evidence indicates that Indian democracy is exceptionally, I use the word extraordinarily well institutionalized for a country of India's level of GDP. Now, we can debate whether Indian democracy is as well institutionalized as North American or Western European democracy. We can discuss that. But for developing countries, India is the only developing country with a GDP per capita of less than about $10,000 per year that has a well-institutionalized democracy with 3 or 4 decades history of regular elections with transfer of power. Now, if people feel that the BJP is somehow undermining democracy, I tell them, no, the BJP has been modernizing Indian democracy. And this is the story that comes out of all the books about the 2019 election. What the BJP has done is it's become India's first modern political party, in the sense that they're using the same kinds of information technology and electoral tools that are routinely used by the U.S. Democrats, the U.S. Republicans, Labour and Conservatives in the U.K. The most important thing for Indian democracy today is that other opposition parties in India, particularly the Congress, but also the AAP, any other opposition parties, that they modernize as well. They won't be able to compete with the BJP and make India a truly competitive democracy again unless they adopt the same kinds of modern tools that the BJP has.
All right, I leave it on that note. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you.
आपने सुना होगा डिफॉल्ट हो रहा है या दिवालिया हो रहा है या मेल्टडाउन हो रहा है वो हो चुका हुआ है हमारे मुल्क के इस वक्त हालात है हम दिवालिया मुल्क के रहने वाले हैं हमें 200-300 मिलियन डॉलर के लिए मैंने खुद देखा है मिन्नतें करते हुए अपने हुक्मरानों को मैं उनके साथ होता हूं
So what exactly would happen if Pakistan were to actually default on its debt? For starters, the country will be unable to repay its commercial loans. The central bank will have turned down debt repayment to service payments to commercial lenders. This will, of course, trigger automatically a downgrading of the country's credit rating by agencies like Moody's and S&P and Fitch. The decrease in dollar inflows will further limit the country's ability to import essential items. This, in turn, will impact the economic output. Inflation, which is already sky high, will further skyrocket. So let's break down the economic meltdown of Pakistan in numbers. Pakistan's external debt servicing rose by 70% in the first 2 quarters of 2022-23. In the first half of the fiscal year, Pakistan paid a little over $10 billion in just servicing its external debt. Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves are dwindling. They're down to just $3 billion, which can barely cover 3 weeks of imports. Its fiscal deficit widened to 43%. The lack of fiscal prudence is one of the reasons why the IMF is delaying this release of a payout. The IMF has asked Islamabad to introduce austerity measures like an increase in energy costs, a jump in taxation rates, and a hike in key lending rates. Crisis hit Pakistan recorded a new high in inflation as it went past 38.5 last week. The Pakistani rupee against the dollar is another indicator of how bad things are. The exchange rate right now is 262 Pakistani rupees to the dollar. The Shahbaz Sharif government has imposed massive new taxes. It's also increased prices of 34 items, including that of fuel. Petrol right now in Pakistan costs 272 rupees, Pakistani rupees per litre. Milk costs just as much. It's 250 rupees a litre for a packet of milk. 320 rupees for a kilogram of curd. Eggs, again, 310 rupees for a dozen eggs in Pakistan. Chicken is selling at 780 rupees for a kg. Rice is selling at 160 rupees a kg. And flour, wheat flour, is selling at 150 to 175 per kilogram. So former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan appeared in the Lahore High Court today for a hearing on his bail application in a case linked to violent protests outside the Election Commission last year. While Imran Khan ended up getting bail, there was a fair share of drama outside the High Court. His convoy was showered with rose petals as it made its way inside the High Court premises. There were a large number of PTI supporters surrounding with cars, chanting slogans of support. Imran Khan, who was on a wheelchair because of being shot in the leg during a rally in November, reached there a little past 6 o'clock in the evening, but he only made it inside the courtroom a good 90 minutes later because his convoy faced difficulty in moving because of the large number of lawyers and supporters who had gathered there. So what exactly is this case that has left Imran Khan in the dock? A terrorism case was filed against Imran in October of 2022. This is after PTI workers took to the streets and held demonstrations outside the Election Commission of Pakistan. The PTI leadership had encouraged these protests after the apex poll body disqualified Imran Khan from holding public office in the Toshakhana case. The protests snowballed into clashes between the protesters and the police in cities like Islamabad, Karachi, Peshawar. There were also multiple instances of vandalism reported during these protests. But Imran Khan is just another factor adding to the growing instability in Pakistan that fundamentally stems from its economic crisis. Today, the International Monetary Fund warned that Pakistan must take steps to ensure that its high earners pay taxes and only the poor get subsidies. In an interview with a German television channel, IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva has said that it shouldn't be that wealthy in Pakistan benefit from subsidies. It should instead be the poor who benefit from subsidies. Those who are making good money need to contribute to the economy. Pakistan needs to be able to function like a normal country and not get into a dangerous place where its debt needs to be restructured. Now, the IMF's chief's statement came just days after a team from the global monetary body visited Pakistan for 10 days and they left without promising any bailout. The talks hit a snag as both sides were not able to reach an agreement on external financing estimates and the precise domestic fiscal measures that need to go. Now, both sides agreed to a set of measures that could still help clinch the deal. Pakistan entered a $6 billion IMF program during Imran Khan's tenure in 2019. That package was increased to $7 billion last year. Currently, the 9th review is going on for the release of a little over $1 billion. But Pakistan's defense minister claims that the country has already defaulted. Khwaja Asif said that they are residents of a bankrupt country and that Pakistan has defaulted.
Focus now to debate 2. After losing the Shiv Sena name and the symbol, former Maharashtra Chief Minister Uddhav Thackeray lashed out at the Eknath Shinde-led faction, accusing it of stealing the identity of the party, but added that the spirit of the Shiv Sena will always belong to the Thackerays. Lashing out at the election watchdog, which granted the party symbol and name to Eknath Shinde, Uddhav Thackeray called the Election Commission compromised and under political pressure, claiming it should be disbanded. The Thackeray faction has moved the Supreme Court and has said the top court will deliver real justice. The top court will hear the plea tomorrow, where the Thackeray faction says legislative numbers are not enough, claiming to have an authoritative majority within the party organization. But that is where the crux of the dispute lies. The Election Commission decided that the test of party constitution could not be relied upon, as the party had not submitted a copy of its amended constitution in 2018, adding that the document itself had been changed to become more undemocratic. So what had happened in 2018 was that the party had gone for an amendment which gave all powers to the Shiv Sena chief. But the Election Commission said it compromised intra-party democracy and perpetuated a fiefdom over party workers. In that case, the poll watchdog felt the test of majority lied in legislative strength, where the Shinde faction had an edge. Even as the fight has moved to the Supreme Court, the question then is the real Shiv Sena debate now settled?
चुनाव आयोग ने जो निर्णय दिया है उसका मैं स्वागत करता हूं। ये लोकशाही का विजय है। हिंदू हृदय सम्राट बाला साहेब ठाकरे जी, धर्मवीर आनंद दिघे जी, इनके विचारों का विजय है।
अगर चुनाव आयोग जिसको कहा जाता है वो ही अगर उसकी नियुक्ति की जाए तो चुनाव आयोग का है। इसलिए मैं कहता हूं कि वो बर्खास्त करना चाहिए। हमारा विश्वास बिल्कुल नहीं है। इसके पहले भी ईवीएम वगैरह सारी चीजों पर हमने हमारी आशंका जताई थी, आज भी सारे लोग जता रहे हैं और मैं तो मानता हूं कि इसको तुरंत बर्खास्त करना चाहिए और जो भी सुनवाई है सुप्रीम कोर्ट में होनी चाहिए।
There appears to be more trouble for the Uddhav Thackeray camp. A notice has been sent to the Charity Commissioner complaining about Sena Bhavan. The notice asks, when Sena Bhavan is under private trusts, why is it being used for political activities? Mayuresh is joining me on the phone line. Mayuresh, just help us understand, what does this actually mean? I mean, what exactly is this notice which has been sent to the Charity Commissioner? Who has sent this notice?
Absolutely. This notice basically has been sent by a private person, and this notice basically says that the Shivai Charitable Trust, which is a private trust which owns the place where Shiv Sena Bhavan is right now, and the notice also says that if this place is owned by a private charitable trust, then how does that particular trust is allowing the political activities to take place there? We all know the Shiv Sena Bhavan is the headquarters of Shiv Sena, where every day some kind of political activity is happening, and after the split in the party, and now the party name and symbol has gone to the Eknath Shinde. We have seen that every day, almost every day, Uddhav Thackeray and other senior leaders are coming and they're addressing a press conference, holding the meeting. So this notice is basically objecting to that, and they have basically asked the charitable commissioner that how you are allowing a private charitable trust to conduct the political activity in their premises.
Yes, Mayuresh, what does it actually mean? Because, why would a petition of this nature be filed at this juncture? And when you say notice, a notice is usually issued by a court or by a statutory body. I mean, and a private individual cannot really send a notice.
Exactly. So this notice has been sent via a legal firm called a Yash Legal Firm. And why this notice? Because we all know that the private charitable trust, which is a Shivai Trust, which is owned, or we can say the trustees are Shiv Sena leaders. But the notice puts a question on that when you say it's a private charitable trust, how you are allowing the political activities. And as you know, that Shiv Sena Bhavan is the epicenter of everything related to Uddhav Thackeray and his camp. So that's why this particular notice has been sent to the charitable commissioner asking a question on this particular aspect.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Joining me now on the show, Shweta Shalini, spokesperson of the BJP, Sudhir Suryavanshi is author of Checkmate, Krishna Hegde is Shiv Sena Shinde faction member, Abhishek Agnihotri is Uddhav faction member. I'm going to begin with you, Krishna Hegde. One may say that yes, it is victory for Eknath Shinde, but how do we forget that there is that emotional appeal that is attached to the Thackeray family, the Thackeray surname, and the real legatee of Balasaheb Thackeray will be his son Uddhav Thackeray. I mean, do you really have an answer to that emotional appeal that Uddhav Thackeray continues to enjoy? What about the sympathy factor?
Maria, first of all, let me correct you that we are not a faction. We are the Shiv Sena, the only Shiv Sena. Secondly, let me tell you that in 2019, Uddhav ji contested the elections along with the BJP on the grounds of the Hindutva ideology. And it is he who ditched the BJP and went with the NCP and the Congress party. Balasaheb in his entire lifetime said कि अगर मुझे कोई भी दिन कांग्रेस और राष्ट्रवादी कांग्रेस के साथ हाथ मिलाना पड़े तो मैं मेरे ये दुकान बंद कर दूंगा. And he was so much against the Congress and the NCP, but Uddhav ji went together with them. So therefore, one, that emotional factor and that sympathetic factor will not prevail. Secondly, the people of Maharashtra feel ditched that in 2019 they voted for the alliance, the Hindutva alliance of the BJP and Shiv Sena, and their votes went waste. And the votes went to the wrong place. And the representatives went and joined hands with some other parties.
Okay.
And therefore, the people of Maharashtra themselves will take this into cognizance. And in the forthcoming 2024 elections and before
what about
that,
the BMC polls? That's where this entire battle will be settled, I would say. Abhishek Agnihotri, despite all the आप बहुत सारा emotional appeal और emotional भाषण दे रहे हैं उद्धव ठाकरे जी, लेकिन जो मेन इलेक्शन होगा वो बीएमसी का चुनाव है, उसी में शायद सेटल हो जाएगा कि किस तरफ जो शिव सैनिक है वो किस तरफ हैं. तो उसका इंतजार कर लीजिए. सुप्रीम कोर्ट और इलेक्शन कमीशन में जो हुआ, जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट में तभी फैसला होना है, इलेक्शन कमीशन में हुआ तो वो तो एक्सपेक्टेड लाइंस में था, क्योंकि जिसमें कोई सरप्राइज फैक्टर नहीं होना चाहिए, क्योंकि दे विल ऑलवेज गो विद पास्ट प्रेसिडेंट एंड द प्रेसिडेंट इज अबाउट द न्यूमेरिकल स्ट्रेंथ इन असेंबली, नॉट अबाउट द ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल पावर.
इलेक्शन कमीशन ने जो निर्णय अपना दिया है, ये बात जाहिर सी बात है, हमारे शिव सैनिकों से लेकर सभी पदाधिकारियों सबके संज्ञान में था कि इलेक्शन कमीशन भविष्य में क्या निर्णय देने वाला है. लेकिन इलेक्शन कमीशन अक्रॉस द लाइन जाके जो निर्णय दे रहा है, ये कहीं न कहीं उपहास का विषय भविष्य में बनेगा, क्योंकि माननीय उद्धव साहब ठाकरे अब जो है सुप्रीम कोर्ट की ओर रुख कर चुका है. सुप्रीम कोर्ट पहले इस चीज को निर्णय जब मंगलवार को इस पर सुनवाई करने वाला था, तो ये नहीं समझ में एक बात हम लोगों को आती है कि इतनी जल्दबाजी में निर्णय इलेक्शन कमीशन देने की आवश्यकता कहां से आ गई. इतनी भी किस बात की जल्दबाजी थी? क्या इलेक्शन कमीशन से पहले किसी प्रकार किस तरह के मामलों को सॉर्ट आउट किया है? नहीं किया है. उसका अधिकार सिर्फ इतना है कि वो इलेक्शन कमीशन नए सिंबल्स पे और पार्टी के चुनाव चिन्ह और उसके नाम को निर्णित कर सकता है कि ये पार्टी चुनाव चिन्ह को अलॉट कर सकती है.
अभिषेक जी, मुझे ये बताइए, क्या उद्धव ठाकरे के वकीलों ने इलेक्शन कमीशन को ये कहा था कि आप फैसला मत सुनाइए क्योंकि सुप्रीम कोर्ट अभी इस मामले पर फैसला करने वाली है?
नहीं, वो तो हमारे इस चीज का अथॉराइज्ड पार्टी थी ही नहीं ना. कैसे कह सकती है किसी भी जो है उसको? लेकिन वो किसके इशारों पर इलेक्शन कमीशन ऑफ इंडिया काम कर रहा है, ये जरूर जांच का विषय होना चाहिए. ये कौन सा मतलब जो है वही वाला हाल कि बंदर को रस्सी पकड़ के और अपने हिसाब से नचाया जा रहा है. ईडी हो, सीबीआई हो,
नहीं, तो आप बोल रहे हैं कि यहाँ पे बंदर कौन है? इलेक्शन कमीशन बंदर हो गया?
नहीं, इलेक्शन कमीशन बंदर की भांति मैंने कहा. बंदर हो गया नहीं हो गया तो खैर भविष्य बताएगा कि वो किसके हाथ की कठपुतली बन के काम.
Bring in Shweta Shalini. Shweta Shalini, the election commission's decision may offer legitimacy to Eknath Shinde and his team, but the question is what happens to the BJP, Eknath Shinde or Shiv Sena group now? Because will it be a joint battle that you'll be fighting in the BMC? Because it will be the BMC that will settle in which way the entire, the direction of Maharashtra politics is heading.
So, Maria, before I answer your question, I wanted to tell Abhishek Agnihotri ji something. और क्योंकि उन्होंने हिंदी में बात की, तो मैं उनको कहना चाहूंगी कि अभिषेक जी, वो खिसियानी बिल्ली खंबा नोचे आपने सुना होगा ना, याद करिए, आपकी आवाज एकदम वैसी ही लग रही है. सेकंड, मारिया, he said, मैंने आपके बीच में बोला नहीं था, आप बोलिए मत. Second thing, he basically said that itni jaldbazi mein kiya. Election Commission took 8 months to decide on this. Nonetheless, let me answer your question. See, it is very clear the government in Maharashtra is run by Eknath Shinde ji and Devendra Fadnavis ji. It has been categorically made clear that both of us together will fight every election in the future. And this is exactly what it is going to be, because Maharashtra government is formed on the ideology of Hindutva, and it was fought on the ideology of Hindutva in 2019 also. Unfortunately, there were people who decided to ditch us and go with the losers, the so-called losers in 2019. But nonetheless, ऐसा है अभिषेक जी, आपके आप जो है आप परिवार की गुलामी कर सकते हैं अभिषेक जी। आप परिवार, जिस परिवार की गुलामी आप कर रहे हैं ना, उसकी अपने भाई ने उनको छोड़ दिया है। जो थापा जो था ना, जिसने इतने सालों तक बाला साहब की सेवा की, उन्होंने तक घर से निकाल दिया गया है उनको। आपकी स्मिता ठाकरे जी जो है, उन्होंने भी परिवार जब परिवार के साथ नहीं खड़ा है, जितने लोग जो आप इलेक्शन कमीशन को बंदर कह रहे हैं ना, आप अपने बारे में आप किसके उस पे नाच रहे हैं। और ऐसा है, एजेंसी पे सवाल जब उठाते हैं, जब हिमाचल में आपकी कांग्रेस जीतती है, जिस कांग्रेस के साथ आप बैठे हैं, जब हिमाचल में कांग्रेस जीतती है तब तो सवाल नहीं उठाते आप। अब क्यों उठाने लग गए आप एजेंसी पे सवाल? आपको ये तक तो पता नहीं है कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट का जो केस था वो अलग था और इलेक्शन कमीशन में अलग बैटल था। आप कह रहे हैं सुप्रीम कोर्ट में हमने कहा था कि आप रुक जाइए जरा, इलेक्शन कमीशन में जरा देर से आप निर्णय लीजिए। 8 महीने लिए उन्होंने निर्णय करने में, और जाके पूछे ना आपके शरद पवार जी ने तो सही बात कही है, एकदम सही उन्होंने आपको एडवाइस दी है, उनका एडवाइस तो
Okay, let me bring in Sudhir Suryavanshi now. Sudhir Suryavanshi, I want to understand from you, since you are the author of Checkmate, and as various Moharas stand on this chessboard, is it game, set and match for Uddhav Thackeray, or is the game still on?
See, in politics, one thing we have to understand categorically, that in politics, no party or no person get finished in a day or in a month or something like that.
Yes.
If you remember when the Barasaheb Thackeray, passed, that time many people thought that now Raj Thackeray will completely hijack the Shiv Sena and he will be the powerful person. Entire Shiv Sena will move on to the Raj Thackeray. Uddhav Thackeray, mild-mannered politician, he is not fit to the politics, or the person will not able to hold the fort. But what we saw after that he won not only BMC elections, but continued to hold the fort and win the significant number for his party. So one thing we have to understand, nobody gets finished in a day or something like that. Election Commission might have given bow and arrow, which is a traditional party symbol of the Shiv Sena, and the party name to Eknath Shinde. There are many reasons for that also. That is a disputable thing. But Thackeray will not be ended as a person, as a political party also. If you understand the sentiment of the Maharashtra and the Shiv Sena always emerged on the sentiment, initially in 1960s, anti-North Indian, then South Indian, then Congress and all these things. When the Uddhav Thackeray became the chief minister and Uddhav Thackeray became a party person, there were two different leadership. Uddhav Thackeray became a chief minister, emerged as a leader. Earlier, Uddhav Thackeray leadership was limited with his party or his cadre, or not that much accepted, wide range of people. But today, the way he worked in the pandemic, everybody, cross-section has appreciated his work. Then there are many, lacunas also for that, and because of that only Eknath Shinde revolted, because he could not give the time, he could not, discuss, he could not talk with his own people, so they were not treated fairly. So the revolt was happened. These are the, negative points of the Uddhav Thackeray.
I want to understand from you, because you will understand the Marathi sentiment, you're talking about that. What is the dominating sentiment, if it is about this victimhood or sympathy factor that, that Uddhav Thackeray is trying to invoke, or will it be about compromise to the ideology or Hindutva which Shinde faction is trying to invoke?
See, one thing we need to understand, Hindutva is there, but Uddhav Thackeray is trying to redefine Hindutva. He is not taking Hindutva, which Bala Sahib always talked that Hindutva. He is taking Hindutva. His grandfather, that Prabodhan Ka Thakre, reformist Thakre Hindutva, means inclusive Hindutva. Take all caste, creed, religion people together and progress it. He always says in Marathi, not Shendi and Janve, which is a Brahminical sort of the Hindutva. He doesn't believe in that Hindutva. He believes inclusion, Bahujan, which is the Shahu Phule, Ambedkar, other reformists, social reformer believe sort of this Hindutva. He believes in that larger umbrella of Hindutva, not a myopic, sense of Hindutva. So because of that, many people who were against him, like in Dalit community, Muslim community, these people were not liking Uddhav Thackeray and the Shiv Sena earlier. But they are a big fan of Uddhav Thackeray, the way he worked in the pandemic and the way he handled the his 2 years old government. So everybody was, he became a what we call a favorite name in the middle class family also. The way he addressed his Facebook page, everybody called him like mild manner, elderly
Okay, then in that case, Krishna ji,
yeah.
Here is someone who's the author of Checkmate. He is saying that Uddhav Thackeray clearly has an advantage because of how he has functioned during pandemic. The other side of the view, which is your view, and those who see the view of Eknath Shinde, is that if anything, he was a chief minister, was missing in action, and that is where Mr. Shinde saw an opportunity because there was a huge vacuum in leadership.
No, Maria, are you trying to tell me that Uddhavji worked in the pandemic and crores of Shiv Sainik, including all these leaders, did not work in the pandemic? I think it was a joint effort. I think everyone in Maharashtra, all leaders in Maharashtra worked towards the pandemic and worked hard for the people. Secondly, when we talk about Hindutva, ours is also an inclusive Hindutva. We are including development along with it. Today, if you see in Mumbai, 10 lakh crores of work is going on, in Mumbai, development work. And we are having Samruddhi Mahamarg, we are having 7 STP plans, we are having so many other infrastructure projects in Mumbai and Maharashtra. And therefore, the metro rail or, hospitals, you name the thing, it's happening in Maharashtra. And during the Mahavikas Agadi regime, most of the investment had gone away because it was known as the Vasuli Sarkar and the government was unstable.
Pakistan entered a $6 billion IMF program during Imran Khan's tenure in 2019. That package was increased to $7 billion last year. Currently, the 9th review is going on for the release of a little over $1 billion. But Pakistan's defense minister claims that the country has already defaulted. Khwaja Asif said that they are residents of a bankrupt country and that Pakistan has defaulted and there exists an economic meltdown in the country. Asif said that everyone, including the establishment, the bureaucracy, the politicians, they are all responsible for the current situation. And that the IMF does not have any solutions because they lie within the country.
आपने सुना होगा डिफॉल्ट हो रहा है या दिवालिया हो रहा है या मेल्टडाउन हो रहा है वो हो चुका हुआ है हमारे मुल्क के इस वक्त हालात है हम दिवालिया मुल्क के रहने वाले हैं हमें 200-300 मिलियन डॉलर के लिए मैंने खुद देखा है मिन्नतें करते हुए अपने हुक्मरानों को मैं उनके साथ होता हूं
So what exactly would happen if Pakistan were to actually default on its debt? For starters, the country will be unable to repay its commercial loans. The central bank will have turned down debt repayment to service payments to commercial lenders. This will, of course, trigger automatically a downgrading of the country's credit rating by agencies like Moody's and S&P and Fitch. The decrease in dollar inflows will further limit the country's ability to import essential items. This, in turn, will impact the economic output. Inflation, which is already sky high, will further skyrocket. So let's break down the economic meltdown of Pakistan in numbers. Pakistan's external debt servicing rose by 70% in the first 2 quarters of 2022-23. In the first half of the fiscal year, Pakistan paid a little over $10 billion in just servicing its external debt. Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves are dwindling. They're down to just $3 billion, which can barely cover 3 weeks of imports. Its fiscal deficit widened to 43% The lack of fiscal prudence is one of the reasons why the IMF is delaying this release of a payout. The IMF has asked Islamabad to introduce austerity measures like an increase in energy costs, a jump in taxation rates, and a hike in key lending rates. Crisis hit Pakistan recorded a new high in inflation as it went past 38.5 last week. The Pakistani rupee against the dollar is another indicator of how bad things are. The exchange rate right now is 262 Pakistani rupees to the dollar. The Shahbaz Sharif government has imposed massive new taxes. It's also increased prices of 34 items, including that of fuel. Petrol right now in Pakistan costs 272 rupees, Pakistani rupees per litre. Milk costs just as much. It's 250 rupees a litre for a packet of milk. 320 rupees for a kilogram of curd. Eggs, again, 310 rupees for a dozen eggs in Pakistan. Chicken is selling at 780 rupees for a kg. Rice is selling at 160 rupees a kg. And flour, wheat flour, is selling at 150 to 175 per kilogram. So former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan appeared in the Lahore High Court today for a hearing on his bail application in a case linked to violent protests outside the Election Commission last year. While Imran Khan ended up getting bail, there was a fair share of drama outside the High Court. His convoy was showered with rose petals as it made its way inside the High Court premises. There were a large number of PTI supporters surrounding with cars, chanting slogans of support. Imran Khan, who was on a wheelchair because of being shot in the leg during a rally in November, reached there a little past 6 o'clock in the evening, but he only made it inside the courtroom a good 90 minutes later because his convoy faced difficulty in moving because of the large number of lawyers and supporters who had gathered there. So what exactly is this case that has left Imran Khan in the dock? A terrorism case was filed against Imran in October of 2022. This is after PTI workers took to the streets and held demonstrations outside the Election Commission of Pakistan. The PTI leadership had encouraged these protests after the apex poll body disqualified Imran Khan from holding public office in the Toshakhana case. The protests snowballed into clashes between the protesters and the police in cities like Islamabad, Karachi, Peshawar. There were also multiple instances of vandalism reported during these protests. But Imran Khan is just another factor adding to the growing instability in Pakistan that fundamentally stems from its economic crisis. Today, the International Monetary Fund warned that Pakistan must take steps to ensure that its high earners pay taxes and only the poor get subsidies. In an interview with a German television channel, IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva has said that it shouldn't be that wealthy in Pakistan benefit from subsidies. It should instead be the poor who benefit from subsidies. Those who are making good money need to contribute to the economy. Pakistan needs to be able to function like a normal country and not get into a dangerous place where its debt needs to be restructured. Now, the IMF's chief's statement came just days after a team from the global monetary body visited Pakistan for 10 days and they left without promising any bailout. The talks hit a snag as both sides were not able to reach an agreement on external financing estimates and the precise domestic fiscal measures that need to go. Now, both sides agreed to a set of measures that could still help clinch the deal. Pakistan entered a $6 billion IMF program during Imran Khan's tenure in 2019. That
Just because someone has succeeded is not enough to say why that person has succeeded. You have to break down what is the quid pro quo or the scam or the corruption or the crony capitalism here.
Interestingly, these spy balloons fly at great heights, at more than 40,000 feet. The Chinese themselves claim that they all went astray. Can we put it past them that they will not resort to this? This is a World War II technique.
I think the point of concern is how much exposure do public sector institutions have to this particular set of companies, because that at the end of the day is public money.
Child marriage is something that should be stopped. It is abusive, and if anything, it is a menace.
Essential items. This in turn will impact the economic output. Inflation, which is already sky high, will further skyrocket. So let's break down the economic meltdown of Pakistan in numbers. Pakistan's external debt servicing rose by 70% in the first 2 quarters of 2022-23. In the first half of the fiscal year, Pakistan paid a little over $10 billion in just servicing its external debt. Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves are dwindling. They're down to just $3 billion, which can barely cover 3 weeks of imports. Its fiscal deficit widened to 43%. The lack of fiscal prudence is one of the reasons why the IMF is delaying this release of a payout. The IMF has asked Islamabad to introduce austerity measures like an increase in energy costs, a jump in taxation rates, and a hike in key lending rates. Crisis hit Pakistan recorded a new high in inflation as it went past 38.5 last week. The Pakistani rupee against the dollar is another indicator of how bad things are. The exchange rate right now is 262 Pakistani rupees to the dollar. The Shahbaz Sharif government has imposed massive new taxes. It's also increased prices of 34 items, including that of fuel. Petrol right now in Pakistan costs 272 rupees, Pakistani rupees per litre. Milk costs just as much. It's 250 rupees a litre for a packet of milk, 320 rupees for a kilogram of curd. Eggs, again, 310 rupees for a dozen eggs in Pakistan.